Told my mom we won't be her chauffeur or attend her church-ordained anti-Mother's Day. Wife suggests cutoff and counseling. My wife and I always take our moms to a restaurant on Mother's Day weekend with our 2 kids, and we'll sometimes do something fun afterwards, such as a movie or hanging out in the backyard. However, things have been difficult for my mom since my father passed away some years ago, and it led to a relapse in drinking, that she stopped for some time when he was alive, along with some depression too. Things began to get better when one of her friends invited her to church, and she's attended for almost 2 years, which coincided with her dropping alcohol again, along with improvements to her mental health, as she got more involved with midweek classes/church support groups. However, that came with some negative side effects that led to me putting up boundaries with her. My mom wasn't raised religious growing up, but she began to change upon going, which later led to me making this post. One of the earliest things she began doing was criticizing the radio in my car for not being Christian music when driving her to doctor's appointments, something I ignored because driver picks the radio. But when she criticized my wife for not bringing our kids to her church's Sunday school, my wife told me, and I told mom, that while we're happy that church has helped her depression and cutting back on alcohol, we personally disagree with indoctrinating kids, but she didn't like my answer. She said I owed it to her to take them because her husband wasn't saved and wouldn't be in heaven with her, and she didn't want the same for her grandchildren. But when I held firm on my stance, she said I was failing as a parent before we eventually dropped it. But when she criticized my wife's parenting for almost an hour while at a little league game for our son some months back, a game I wasn't present for that also made her cry, that led to us deciding to set boundaries and taking a break from driving/telling her about sporting events for our kids. Our decision was also based on mom's newfound willingness to pester my wife, via text, about who she'd be voting for and why she'd be voting right for the first time after explaining how she wrongly voted left before going to church. My wife told her nicely that she didn't feel comfortable discussing politics, but mom ignored her and continued telling her who she should vote for. That finally brings me to Mother's Day. When we set boundaries, we took a break from bringing her to our kids' sporting events, but decided to keep holiday gatherings, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Memorial, July 4th, etc., until she improved. But as of this weekend, mom called my wife and told her that she didn't want to be included in Mother's Day activities because her church was boycotting Mother's Day after the pastor's wife spoke about how too many women skipped church to go to breakfast when God should always come first no matter the holiday. So for that reason, her church was having a Mother's Day luncheon after service where they wanted mothers to invite their families to church for the holiday, and she wanted us to come with the kids to hear a message about mothers from God. But when my wife said she would talk to me about it, mom criticized her for always having to ask me and said she needed to grow a spine, which I don't appreciate. She also told her that our kids needed to be in church and that she wouldn't spend other holidays with us unless we came, and I'm quite aggravated with her at the moment. So, in conclusion, here is my question. My wife thinks we should cut her off permanently, but I'm in charge of driving her to doctor's appointments along with getting her medication because she can't drive, so that makes it slightly complicated to cut her off since her health depends on us. She said she doesn't want a nurse or retirement home. But if it weren't for that, I'm right there with her. My wife offered the idea of only me keeping contact for the sole purpose of medication/doctors only, but she's also unsure and suggested counseling on the matter, and I'm open to doing that together. Update 1. But before I do, there's one thing I want to address. Many people asked why I didn't cut my mom out of our lives immediately after she made my wife cry at a baseball game, and I discussed cutting her off when it happened. However, my wife disagreed and said my mom needed support in 2 ways, seeing the kids and driving her shopping and to doctors/prescriptions. We set a boundary of no longer taking her to our kids' games, but my wife also said that her seeing the kids for holidays would help her overcome the loss of her husband, and she believed that losing access to their sporting events would make her change. However, the biggest reason my wife didn't want to cut her off is because she's a Christian too, and she was happy when my mom got saved and believed we should turn the cheek, despite the baseball incident, because God loved us when we didn't deserve it. So we agreed to just remove her from sporting events to see if she'd change. Personally, I'm not a Christian, but my wife and I think similarly. She despises how many Christians criticize gays and abortion and believes that God loves all people for who they are, and she said she'd be supportive if our kids came out too. That brings me to what happened since my original post. After my mom told my wife to grow a spine and stop bringing everything she suggests to me in unity, my wife reached her breaking point and wanted to officially cut her off. And thanks to helpful comments that told us how to have her prescriptions delivered and suggest having one of her church friends/Uber take her to doctors if she's going to continue verbally abusing my wife/family, I sat down with her and gave her those options, and she didn't like anything I had to say. She reiterated how I was failing my kids when I told her we wouldn't bring them to church for Mother's Day in exchange for her no longer spending time with our family as she threatened, because family time isn't conditional. And when I asked how she could throw away who she was before Grandpa passed, she reiterated how she regretted accepting Christ before Grandpa passed and that he wasn't in heaven because of it. So when she told me that she didn't want me taking her shopping or to the doctor anymore, she said I wasn't her child anymore because I was preventing her from being around my kids. So she basically disowned me in hopes that I'd cave and bring my kids to church on Mother's Day coming up, and my wife and I have no plans to do so. It's been really hard the past few days since we spoke, but my wife supports our boundary and added one more reason why she hit her breaking point during a recent argument between my wife and mom. My mom asked her why she wouldn't bring our kids to her church, or any church, at all when my wife is a Christian, and my wife told her that she hasn't attended any church since 2016 because church in America has changed in many places. The church my wife attended began becoming more political, even to the point of endorsing the 45th president from the pulpit during sermons and occasionally making comments about gay/abortion, and she believes that church is supposed to be about love and not hate like too many churches have forgotten since 2016. So for that reason, my wife simply reads her Bible at home and said she'll never enter a church again outside of a funeral because too many churches worship Trump instead of God, and my mom called her a fake Christian despite only being a Christian for 2 years since Grandpa died compared to my wife who's been a Christian for much longer. We plan to stay firm to our boundary on Mother's Day, but it honestly hurts to have been disowned. So if anyone has any suggestions about coping with that, I'd appreciate it, although my wife has been supportive, and we're trying to figure out how to tell our kids that Grandma likely won't be a part of our lives anymore, along with the importance of choosing religion, or not, for themselves, which is why we're making the boundary with Grandma. So if anyone has any suggestions on how to speak to our kids too, we'd appreciate that as well. Since your mom wants to boycott Mother's Day, then that means you get to spend it with the mother of your child and your mill. As for her doctor appointments and prescriptions, you can arrange for an Uber and a prescription mail service. Although she's probably only in her 50s, so why can't she drive herself or arrange her own Uber? She's obviously getting herself to church. Amazon has one of the larger mail-order prescription services out there, but most chain pharmacies now do medication delivery. You might not even have to switch pharmacies. Wheelchairs don't suck the asshole out of people, unfortunately, or weed have people cutting off their legs for sainthood. It does suck how the Lord giveth and taketh away, but it's her decision to stay at that church and let them influence her. She's a grown woman who used to know different. But yeah, I've seen other people suggest her asking church people to run her errands. That's a good one, actually. A decent church that actually has a sense of community would do that. A church that's only there to indoctrinate and pass the plate won't. Update 2. We held our line on Mother's Day. I made pancakes with the kids, my mill came over, and we did a backyard picnic because our daughter insisted moms eat outside on Mother's Day if the sun is out, and I wasn't going to argue with a 6-year-old meteorologist. My phone stayed face down until after we ate, and when I finally checked it, I had a voicemail from an unknown number. It was my mom reading a passage from Proverbs and telling me a wise son brings joy to his mother, then pausing long enough for me to hear the congregation humming in the background like she'd stepped out to the hallway to record it. She said she would forgive me if we walked in before the luncheon prayer because God loves restorations on holidays, and said she'd saved a table. We didn't go. About an hour later, 2 women I didn't recognize came to our door in flowy floral dresses with a foil pan and said they were from Mom's church delivering blessing cake. They asked for our kids by name and said they wanted to invite them personally to hear a message for little hearts. My wife stepped out onto the porch and told them calmly, "No, thank you. We don't do drop-ins and we're not discussing church." One of them asked if my wife had permission to say that, and my wife answered, "I don't need permission in my own house." I don't know if it was the way she said it or the fact that our dog stared them down, but they left the pan on the stoop and walked back to a minivan with a fish sticker. We threw the cake away. Our son asked if that was Grandma's team, which about broke me. We thought that was it until Sunday evening when my mom texted my wife a photo of a half-full wine glass with the caption, "When the world abandons you, the world is what you have." I didn't answer right away because I felt sick. A neighbor who's friendly with her told me later he'd seen her sitting on the front steps with that glass and a church lady talking to her with her hand on Mom's shoulder while Mom sobbed. I hate this disease. I also hate that she uses it as a weapon when she wants leverage. Monday morning I got a call from the pharmacy letting me know my authorization to pick up was removed and that my mom told them I'm no longer involved. I didn't fight it because that was the boundary she picked. That afternoon Adult Protective Services called me because my mom made a report that I'd cut her off from medical care. I explained everything I'd offered, how she declined rides and deliveries and said she wanted neither a nurse nor a home, and the APS worker listened and ended by saying, "Our job is to make sure she's not in danger, not to compel you to do what she wants." It was surreal hearing a stranger repeat the boundary back to me in bureaucratic language. They said they'd do a wellness check and close it out if she had capacity and services available. She does. She did. She just doesn't want the kind that don't involve me. My wife and I went to the counseling appointment we'd been trying to schedule, and I'm glad we did. The therapist helped us write what she called clear, simple criteria for contact instead of the moving target we've been living with. We emailed it to my mom: no proselytizing to our kids, no political discussions, no insulting our parenting or our marriage, and no contact when she's been drinking, or we leave. We told her we'd revisit holidays if 6 months went by with her respecting those. She responded with a scanned letter on their church letterhead that she'd clearly asked someone to draft for her. It said my wife was obstructing biblical headship, that we were shutting the gate on God, and that my mother submits to church discipline over family ties. She wrote "I choose God" in pen at the bottom and underlined it 3 times. I can't describe how cheap and glossy the paper felt and how heavy the words did. 2 days later my wife found a bright flyer tucked under the wipers on her car in our driveway advertising Kids Crusade Week with a handwritten note on the back: "Your grandma saved you a spot." It was our daughter's name, spelled correctly in my mom's handwriting. My wife's hand shook when she showed it to me. We checked the door camera and it wasn't my mom who left it, it was one of the women from Mother's Day with the minivan. I drove to the league field that night and talked to the commissioner before practice. I told him my mother is not allowed at games and that I'm worried someone from the church will try to approach my kids. He said they'd have a board member on the gate this week and to point out anyone unwanted. I hate that it's come to patrolling a little league fence, but I also don't want to look up and see my daughter being handed a tract with glitter glue hearts on it. We also had one conversation I didn't expect. A man named Rick called me and said he was a deacon at my mom's church and that she had put me as her emergency contact on their care team forms. He wanted to know if, in an emergency, I would honor her wishes to see her grandchildren before she passes. He emphasized before she passes like he was reading a script. I told him my mother isn't dying, she's grieving and being told that grief equals holiness if it hurts the right people. He was quiet for a long time and then said, she's been giving a lot of her money to missions. Sometimes people get overzealous. I don't know what that meant beyond the obvious, but hearing it from inside their building made my stomach drop. I told him to remove me as the emergency contact and gave him the neighbor's number until my mom chooses a different care plan. He said he couldn't without her consent and I said then he can ask her and copy me. He did, and she wrote back, my son is dead to me. Use Rick, and I don't know why seeing it typed instead of spoken heard in a brand new way. We finally told the kids in simple terms. Grandma is making choices that aren't safe for us right now, is what my wife said, and we hope she makes different ones so we can see her again. Our son asked if that's like when you have to sit out an inning when you don't listen to the coach. We said yes, kind of like that. He took it better than I did. This morning I got an envelope addressed in my mom's slanted cursive. Inside was a birthday card for our daughter, a shiny ballerina on the front, and a $10 bill taped inside with a voucher for Vacation Bible School. The note said, I will always love you if you choose truth. We didn't give it to her. We put the $10 in her piggy bank and the rest in a folder with everything else because the counselor said to keep a record. I don't know what else to do with a sentence like that except not let it land where it was aimed. We're sticking to the plan. We're not going to her church. We're not being her drivers. We're not letting our kids be used as rope in a tug of war. It is lonely and it is quieter. It is also better than having our front step turned into a mission field. My mom knows exactly what it would take to see her grandkids again. Until she chooses that, I can't choose for her. Update 3. The first actual line got drawn in orange chalk dust at the ball field. The bored guy with the bucket hat, Kevin, I learned, was at the gate like he said he'd be, and I was feeling silly for being on alert until I saw one of the floral dress women from our porch float up the sidewalk with a tote bag and a glossy stack under her arm. She tried to hand our daughter a sticker that said Jesus loves mommies and I didn't even have to say anything because Kevin stepped between them with the kind of dad voice that ends sleepovers. Ma'am, you're not on the player list. You can watch from the outfield fence or you can leave. She pointed at me and said, he's denying a grandmother access to her family, and Kevin said, I'm denying adults access to minors without their parents' permission. When she didn't move, he radioed something, and 2 minutes later a patrol car rolled up so fast the dust swirled into the dugout. They didn't arrest anyone, but they did take names, and the officer wrote a trespass notice on his hood while the woman cried and asked me if I was happy persecuting Christians at T-ball. Our daughter asked why the lady's mascara was on her cheek, and our son asked if the police were on our team. On the drive home I could still smell the sunscreen from Kevin's nose. 2 days after that, someone beat me to the punch on the other side of the system. CPS called and scheduled a home visit because of concerns about religious neglect and social isolation. The worker had the same cadence as the APS one, calm, almost bored, and asked if we were comfortable talking at the kitchen table. She looked at our fridge magnets while I explained the letter, the flyer, the driveway drop-ins, and the criteria we sent. She asked the kids their names and what their favorite foods were and whether they felt safe at home. Our daughter said, without irony, I feel safe when daddy flips pancakes, and the worker smiled at me like she'd been handed an easy close. She left with a copy of the boundary email and a photo of the trespass notice and told me she'd mark it unfounded and family conflict. It was another one of those surreal sentences that sounded like an incantation but meant we see you. 15 minutes after she left, the principal called to say someone had left goodie bags with tracts and lifesavers at the front office for the little, our kids' names, and would we like the school to dispose of them. I told her yes, and she asked if we wanted to add no release to grandmother/church members on the pickup notes. It's now in red next to peanut allergies. The prayer walk happened the following Wednesday. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't watched it back on the door cam, because in person it felt like a fever dream. A little line of 5 people in sensible shoes and cardigan layers came down our block quietly singing Waymaker, stopping at our sidewalk to murmur and touch the air like it was a thin membrane they could press through if they just believed hard enough. One of the Mother's Day ladies took out a small bottle and dabbed oil on our mailbox flag. The cinnamon smell hit me when I opened it later, and another woman raised her hand toward our living room window while our son played with Legos 3 feet away. I told them to move along from the porch. They told me they were on public sidewalk. I told them they were. Then the neighbor across the street turned on his sprinkler and the arc nailed the one with the bottle full in the back, and she squealed and took 2 steps onto our grass before she remembered where she was. That was enough to get an officer out again. He told them if they set foot on our property they'd be cited and asked me if I wanted to file for a formal harassment order. I went inside and emailed a lawyer instead. 2 days later a cease and desist went out on actual stationery that didn't come off a church copier. We put one in the folder. I ran into Rick by the rotisserie chickens at the grocery store like the universe is a sitcom writer with a prop budget. He looked tired and not in a holy way. He said he was sorry about the prayer walk, said he hadn't known about it, said some of the ladies were on fire and needing an outlet. He told me there had been questions about how much missions giving had gone to local needs versus capital improvements, and that the pastor was on a rest sabbatical while the board reviewed procedures. I said my mother had been giving away a lot of money. He nodded like he'd already heard that and said he was stepping down as deacon and maybe looking for a different church or maybe a long nap. He also said my mom had been asking for me. I reminded him I wasn't her emergency contact. He said, "She asked me to tell you anyway." I bought a chicken because I'd been staring at them for 10 minutes holding grape tomatoes and not moving. At 1:13 a.m. the next night my phone lit up with a number I didn't know and a tone I did. St. Luke's ER. My mom had fallen on her front steps and a neighbor had called it in when she couldn't get up. She asked if we'd call her son. The nurse said like she knew I needed the permission slip. My wife squeezed my hand and said, "Go, but don't take the kids." The ER smelled like antiseptic and microwave popcorn and the TV over the nurse's station was stuck on a weather loop of green blobs nowhere near us. My mom's wrist was in a splint and she had that hollowed out look that drinking and crying car fast. She looked at my face like she was checking to see if I was going to be a person or a decision. "If I say sorry, does it count if I still believe what I believe?" she asked. I said, "It counts if you stop doing what you did." She closed her eyes and said, "I don't feel God." I said, "That's not my job." We sat in the beep and the fluorescent light for a while. I told her the criteria again. I told her my number would work the next day if she wanted help setting up deliveries, rides, or a counselor who wasn't wearing a choir robe. She didn't promise anything in the ER. She asked if I'd tell the kids she fell because the dog leash got tangled, and I said I'd tell them you fell and you're okay. The call that surprised me came from a woman named Maria at a detox center 2 towns over. "Your mother put you down for family day," she said, "if you're willing." My wife and I went. We sat in a circle with a coffee urn that tasted like alarm clock and a laminated sheet on the wall with group rules that looked like our own boundary email translated for public use. My mom cried once, braced, and said, "I did call APS. I did tell you you were dead to me." It felt holy when I said it and now it feels like bile. She tried to pivot into scripture and Maria held up a hand, not unkind. "The group rule is no preaching," she said. "You can talk about your actions." My mom fumbled and tried again. "I don't want to be drunk or righteous," she said. "I want to be in a room with my son and not feel the need to win." She asked if she could see the kids if I do the 6 months, and my wife said, "If you do the 6 months and we don't have to say no to God for a yes to you," which is the kind of sentence she can say without blinking and that I have to write down later to figure out why it hit me. We didn't hug. We shook hands at the end because Maria said to keep it simple. In the parking lot my mom handed me a paperback grief workbook with a sticky note on the chapter about anniversaries and said, I filled out some of the pages. I put it in the folder. It hasn't been a straight line since. She sent me a selfie last week from a church pew across town with the caption "I'm trying a different one," and I didn't answer because trying is a verb and verbs need time. She texted me a photo of her wrist in a proper cast with a little purple heart because my daughter likes purple hearts. She asked if she could drop a birthday card at my neighbor's for me to pick up, and I said she could give it to Maria and we'd get it at family day. She didn't argue. I opened it in the car with my wife and it was just a ballerina and a vanilla happy birthday and $5, no conditions attached in thin blue ink. We put it in the piggy bank in the envelope in the folder. I took my mom to one appointment last week, just me, no kids, no detours, because she asked through Maria and because she was sober and because she didn't talk about church for the entire 22 minutes in the car. We talked about the weather and how the doctor's waiting room still has highlights magazines and how Grandpa used to circle the hidden pictures with a pen and ruin it for everyone else. She cried once at a red light and then wiped her face and said, "I will not weaponize my grief," and I believed her for that moment. We pulled into the pharmacy lot and she said, "I missed the sound of their feet," and I said, "I know," and we didn't fill the silence with scripture or strategy, just the beep of the scanner and the crinkle of a paper bag. It is still quiet here. The mailbox smells faintly of cinnamon when the sun hits it and then not at all by evening. The folder is fatter. The gate at the field has a sign that says players and coaches only that wasn't there last year. The dog has decided the porch is his throne again and naps in a way that suggests nothing uninvited will get past his eyebrows. We haven't changed the criteria. My mom knows exactly what it would take to see her grandkids again. For the first time, she's doing one of the things under her control that isn't about us. I can sit with that without needing to call it holy. I can just call it a start. Update 4. The school sent home a flyer that said Grandfriends Day in bubble letters with a clip art apple that looked like it was hiding something. Our daughter waved it over her head like a flag and asked if the grandma who likes purple hearts could come. We told her no and asked if she'd like Nana. She said yes as if this had been her plan the whole time and we'd finally caught up. The day of, the gym smelled like floor wax and orange slices and 1,000 paper crowns. I watched kids thread between gray heads and perms and ball caps, and I kept thinking about the sound of their feet on the varnished floor and how a person could build a religion out of that if they wanted. The principal saw us and gave me a little nod that said, "You are not crazy for asking for the pickup note," and read. Nana sat between them and clapped so loudly for a class of second graders rhythmically chanting months that our son pinched the bridge of his nose like a little old man. It felt normal in a way that made me forget to clench my jaw. 2 days later Maria called. 30 days, she said, and I could hear staplers and bad coffee in the background. "We do chips on Thursdays." She asked if you'd be there. My wife squeezed my thigh under the table and said, "Go. I'll come if you want." We went. The room was styrofoam cups and folding chairs and a poster that said, "Keep coming back," like a dare. My mom wore a thrifted cardigan that had unpilled elbows and her hair looked like she'd let another human be near it. When it was her turn she stood, palms open, and said, "My name is Anne." I drank because pain told me it was a compass. I gave it a church so it could wear a tie. Someone in the back said, "Keep coming," and a metal chair creaked like punctuation. She didn't preach. Maria didn't have to put a hand up. My mom said, "I called APS on my son like confession, and I said he was dead like it tasted like pennies in her mouth." Then she took a little round coin and slipped it in her pocket and sat down and let the room clap instead of winning. When we were leaving, a woman with a floral scarf was in the hallway with a tin of lemon bars, the kind that leave a dusting on your thumb. I knew her face from the prayer walk and my porch. She said, "I'm just here to support," and Maria stepped in front of her with the polite firmness of a gate at a dog park. "This isn't a church event," she said. "Family and program members only." The woman said, "God goes where he wants," and Maria said, "So do boundaries," and it did something to my spine I didn't know I needed. The lemon bars went back to the car with the fish sticker. Rick texted me a link the next morning that I opened like it might hiss. The pastor had resigned to pursue rest and reflection after questions about allocation of funds, and the board promised increased transparency. The site used a stock photo of clasped hands that looked like it had been taken in a dentist's office. He added, "There was shouting at the meeting, and then, I'm attending a church that feeds people on Wednesdays and doesn't have a fog machine." I stood at the sink and watched the dog watch a squirrel and felt the oddest wave of grief for a building I've never stepped in. Not because of what it was, but because of what it did to the shape of my mom's words. The envelope this week didn't smell like cinnamon. It smelled like toner and came from a print and ship place. Child Dedication Sunday. On glossy with rainbow balloons and a blank line that wasn't blank, our daughter's name filled in with a gel pen flourish and a survivor heart sticker in the corner. No return address, just our box and a dot of oil ghosting the corner through the paper. I slid the $10 inside into the piggy bank and the rest into the folder that's now heavy enough to be a book you could drop on a table when you need a sound effect. I didn't say anything to my mom. I didn't have to. 2 hours later she texted, "I did not send that," without hello. I believed her. She is practicing normal like it's a new language. She figured out how to schedule a lab test without calling me and told me after. She sent a photo of a Walgreens box on her porch and a caption that said, "Delivery is a miracle, and I don't mean the loaves and fishes," which is the kind of joke that tells me she hears herself from the outside sometimes. She also texted me at 9:13 p.m. "I want to pour a glass," and then, 3 dots, and then, I called Elle instead. Elle is her sponsor. It was both nothing and everything to not be asked to be the dam. Our son won a game ball on Saturday, white leather, dirty fingerprints. He carried it around like a moon and asked if Grandma could see it in person when it's safe. We told him maybe soon, if she keeps making the choices she's making. My wife suggested a park bench where we could leave if anyone's voice went sharp. Maria approved like a teacher checking math. We met at the pond off Maple where the ducks know they are the reason for the sign that says "Don't feed the wildlife." My mom was there first, on the far bench under the tree that does confetti in the fall. She had a tote bag I recognized from a grocery store that doesn't exist anymore and hands that were not shaking. She stood and didn't reach for anyone. She had that cast off now. Her wrist was freckled and a little thin, and she wore a purple hair tie like a bracelet because she knows our daughter's brain catalogs purple. Our daughter ran up and declared, "No bread for ducks," because she is incapable of not advising the planet. My mom nodded and said, "I brought peas," and pulled out a Ziploc of cold green that made my wife laugh despite herself. The kids tossed peas like marbles and the ducks ate them like they'd been waiting all day to be respected. It was 22 minutes. She didn't talk about God or politics or rules. She asked our son about his swing like baseball is a language she might learn. He told her he'd leveled it out and she said, "I never leveled anything out in my whole life until lately," and we let it float away because it was temptingly true and not a place to park the car. Our daughter asked her if her wrist had a purple heart on it at the doctor's and my mom said no, but she'd put a sticker on her own car dashboard that only she could see. She handed our daughter a pin of a ballerina that didn't say anything loaded. The sun made shadows like crossed fingers on the grass and my mom cried once and then did that thing where you breathe like you're lifting something heavy. I watched for the tightness around her mouth and the swell of a sermon and it didn't come. We left because we said we would. She didn't ask for more. She waved with her whole hand, not a reach, and the kids waved back like windshield wipers because they are entirely themselves. In the car our son said, "That felt like when you get benched and then coach says okay you can go back in if you listen," and my wife said, "That's because there are rules and everyone followed them." An hour later a bouquet showed up from a flower shop I used to drive past on the way to my dad's chemo a lifetime ago. Tulips, short stems, bright. The card said, "Thank you for trusting me with a try," and I stood there with scissors and the weight of a cardboard sleeve and wanted to call it holy and then didn't. I put the card in the folder. I put the tulips on the table next to the piggy bank and a Lego creation that has 3 wings because the 4th one is in the idea phase. We're not changing the criteria. We're not pretending a pond bench is a cure. We're also not ignoring that for 22 minutes nobody tried to win. The mailbox doesn't smell like anything now. The dog naps like he's finally off duty. The gate at the field squeaks when it closes, and Kevin oiled it for me without saying why. My mom texted me a photo of a day counter on her fridge this morning, 33, in dry erase, a circle around it like a promise to herself. I wrote back, "Keep going." It was small. It was a verb. It was enough for today.